Hello, and welcome to my beginner's tanking guide to the Guardian Druid in World of Warcraft Battle for Azeroth. This video is intended for someone who hasn't tanked on a Druid before, or maybe has but doesn't quite feel like they're getting everything. If you're already really comfortable tanking in heroic level dungeons or higher, this probably isn't the guide for you. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the class fantasy of the Druid. We're going to look at the resources they have available. We're going to go over each spell in our spell book in depth and talk about how we would use it when we were tanking. We're going to look at the core rotation of abilities that you're going to use when tanking. Then we're going to create a passive talent build that's going to allow you to go into dungeons and focus on that main rotation that we talk about without adding a bunch of additional complexity from that talent build. Finally, we're going to take everything that we've learned into a dungeon and show it off in practice. There are timestamps in the description below so you can skip to exactly the section that you need. And with that said, let's get started. So first off, talking about the class fantasy of the Druid. The Druid is a guardian of nature. They use the magic of the earth and the moon, and they shapeshift into various animal shapes, and this provides them with all kinds of different abilities. They have a ton of flexibility, able to perform all of the roles in the game from tank, healer, to melee DPS and range DPS. And within each of those roles, they're still able to shapeshift into their various forms and get some benefit, if not the maximum benefit, from each of those particular animal shapes. Druids wear leather armor, and they're able to equip staves, daggers, one-handed and two-handed maces, fist weapons, and pole arms. They can also use an offhand item, but they cannot dual wield weapons. Now that we've got a good idea of kind of what the Druid feels like in a thematic sort of way, let's talk about the resources that they have available to them in the game. Now, on a Druid, you usually have access to a lot of different resources, which change depending on the shapeshift form that you're in. For example, if you're in just your regular form, you're going to have access to mana. Mana is a resource that you can use to cast spells and abilities. You're also going to retain the access to mana in some of your other forms. When you shapeshift into cat form, you're going to have access to a resource called energy, as well as a resource called combo points. We're not going to discuss that in this video because you don't tank in cat form. You may use cat form for some auxiliary stuff, but mainly what we want to focus on in this video is what you're actually going to be doing when you're tanking. When you're tanking, you're going to be in your bear form. Rage is a resource that you start combat with 0 of, and as you use various abilities, you will generate rage, and then once you've generated rage, you'll spend that rage on other abilities. So you build rage up with certain abilities, and you spend it on other ones. And that's really all there is to it for the resources. When you are tanking, you're mainly going to be concerned with dealing with your rage. If for some reason you have to shapeshift for one reason or the other, then you may be dealing with a different resource such as mana or energy. But as I said before, in this video we're not going to cover that particular aspect. If you'd like to get a good idea of how to manage those other forms, I would highly encourage you to look at one of the other videos I have available for either the feral, restoration, or balance specializations. Now that we have a grasp on the resources available to the Guardian Druid, let's go ahead and start taking a look at the different spells that we have available to us. I am going to go over each spell in detail, so if you feel like you already have a really good grasp on the different abilities that are available, just check the description box below for the timestamps and go ahead and skip to the next section. Couple of caveats before we get started. First, if you've seen one of my videos before, you're going to be familiar with the way that I organize my spells on the action bar. If not, it's really easy to follow along with, and I will explain each section as we kind of get to it with one of the particular abilities. And secondly, I'm not going to be going over any of the abilities that we may have in our book because of talents. We're going to talk about talented abilities later when we create our talent build. Also, for druids in particular, they do have one talent tier at level 45, which gives them an affinity, and as part of your affinity, you gain some abilities that are typically reserved for an entirely different specialization. So I'm going to be skipping over those as well. Right now, I currently have it set to the feral affinity, so I won't be talking about feline swiftness, rake, rip, or ferocious bite. So if I get to those abilities and just skip over them, that's why. Okay, let's kick things off with Bark Skin. Bark Skin is a defensive cooldown, and those for tanks, I like to put them down here, kind of over on this right-hand side of our primary action bar. And Bark Skin is a instant cast ability with a 1.5-minute cooldown. So this is a defensive cooldown that we can use fairly frequently. It says your skin becomes as tough as bark, reducing all damage you take by 20% and preventing damage from delaying your spell cast. This lasts for 12 seconds, and you can use it while you're stunned, frozen, incapacitated, feared, or asleep, and in all your shapeshift forms. So, this brings up a couple of things. First off, the preventing damage from delaying your spell cast is not really going to come into play when you're tanking. Just about every ability you have is going to be an instant cast ability, so there's no way for it to be delayed anyway. There may be times when you have shapeshifted out of your bear form and you are trying to cast a heal or something like that, and then Bark Skin would prevent the spell delay there. But ideally, you should never really have to do that, and you should be in bear form casting your instant abilities. The nice thing for Bark Skin when you're tanking is the 20% reduction in damage taken, and the fact that this ability can be used while you're under the effect of crowd control abilities such as stuns and being feared or asleep. And additionally, a nice benefit of the Bark Skin ability is it's usable in all shapeshift forms. Now, why is that important? Sometimes when you're on a druid, you're going to have abilities, and they're going to differ based on the specialization that you are, that when you cast them, they will force you to come out of whatever animal shape you're in back into your regular form. When you go back into your regular form, you're just a vanilla character with no added benefits. We're going to talk about bear form here in just a second, but essentially, if the ability makes you come out of your bear form, you're going to lose the vast majority of your defensive abilities, and all of a sudden you're going to go from a big tanky character to a pretty squishy character really quickly. So you want to avoid getting removed from your bear form as much as possible. So let's go back into our bear form and let's actually talk about bear form. So bear form is a shapeshift ability. This allows you to shapeshift into a bear. These abilities don't have to go on an action bar. You're going to have a little shapeshift bar right here. This will allow you to shapeshift into all the various forms that you're able to. And so bear is going to be here on the left for us. When you're in bear form, you're going to have your armor increased by 220% and your stamina increased by 45%. So you get a ton more health and you get a ton of armor. So you get a lot of defensive abilities. You also gain protection from polymorph effects, and that's something that applies to all of your shapeshift forms. So I'm not going to repeat myself like 6 times here. Any of your shapeshift forms will grant you the protection from polymorph. Bear form will also increase your threat generation. So you need that threat generation in order to tank. Also, the act of shapeshifting to any of your forms frees you from movement impairing effects. So if there's a slow or you're frozen or something like that, shapeshifting will get you out of that effect. And that applies to all of the shapeshifts again. So the protection from polymorph and the ability to be freed from movement impairing effects applies to all the forms that we're going to talk about today. So we get increased armor, increased stamina, and increased threat generation from going into our bear form. So if we get popped out of our bear form for whatever reason, we lose that increased armor and stamina. The threat reduction is not really as important because at that point you're just trying to stay alive because you just got incredibly squishy really quick. Our next ability is cat form, so we're going to have that protection from polymorph, we're going to have that freeing from movement impairing effects, and honestly, when you are tanking, you're probably not going to be going into cat form very often. There's a thing that you can do called cat weaving or bear weaving, whichever one you want to call it. We're not going to talk about it in this video, and it's kind of an advanced thing that generally, I'm not going to recommend for someone who is just trying to learn how to tank on a druid, but you can look that up in the future if you want to. That gives you a little Google keyword to look for there. You will, however, shapeshift into cat form for probably 1, maybe 2 abilities. that you're going to have available to you while you're tanking. That being said, shapeshifting to cat form does increase your auto attack damage by 40%. Not super relevant when you're tanking. It does increase your movement speed by 30%, so you can shapeshift into cat form between fights if you want to move from like one room of a dungeon to another room a little bit faster. Cat form will give you that 30% increased movement speed. Also, it reduces your fall damage. So if, for whatever reason you're going to fall or you're planning on falling, shapeshifting into cat form will give you a reduction in whatever damage you would take. Next up, we have Charm Woodland Creature. This is just kind of a fun utility ability. I usually just throw those over here on this action bar off to the right side here. And what this will do is it'll allow you to befriend an ambient creature, which will follow the druid for 1 hour. So what's an ambient creature? It's any of the little creatures you see, the little level 1 creatures that are out in the areas, like this rabbit here. You can click on that, you can cast your Charm Woodland Creature, and then you'll have a little pet that follows you around for an hour. So just a cool, fun ability. Our next ability is Dash. This is a utility ability. I like to put those on the top left-hand side of our primary action bar here. Dash is an instant cast ability, has a 2-minute cooldown, and it will activate cat form automatically and increase your movement speed by 60% while in cat form for 10 seconds. So this is good mainly for 2 things. One, getting out of something that you shouldn't be standing in if you feel like you're not going to be able to. So if there's a really large AoE and for some reason you're right in the middle of it and you don't think that running to the outside as a bear is going to be quick enough, then you can hit dash and you can get out of there. Or just like you would switch to cat form anyway, this is good for running from room to room in the dungeon, or if your party got ahead of you somehow, you can catch up with that. And just to kind of show it off, it doesn't matter what shapeshift form you're in, you hit dash, and that's going to turn you into a cat, and then you're going to have this nice dash movement speed increased buff for 10 seconds, and then you'll go back to normal. And at that point, once that movement speed buff has worn off, you're going to want to pop right back over into your bear form and get all those defensive stats back. Next up, we have Dreamwalk. Dreamwalk is a utility ability. It teleports you to the Emerald Dreamway, and the Emerald Dreamway is a sort of central hub that has portals to all the different druid groves around the world of Azeroth. So it's a little kind of teleport place. You can get from place to place a little bit easier in some circumstances. Next, we have Entangling Roots. That's a crowd control ability. I like to put those over here on our kind of little secondary action bar on the top. Entangling Roots cost us some mana to cast. This is one of the abilities that if you try to cast it on something, it is going to shapeshift you out of your animal form. So generally speaking, we're not going to be using Entangling Roots very often when we're tanking, but if we do need to, this is going to root the target in place for 30 seconds, and damage taken may cancel the effect. So generally speaking, if you are using this as a tank, you're probably doing it before you pull anything to cast on a particular target, but usually you're going to have someone in your group who could do a better job at that, maybe a sap from a rogue or a polymorph from a mage. Ferocious Bite, we're going to skip. That's one we're getting from our Feral Affinity talent. We have Flap. Flap is an ability that requires Moonkin form, so that's another form that we're basically never going to touch as a tank. Moonkin form will allow you to shapeshift into a powered up caster, essentially. And I believe Flap is something that I got from a glyph and not a default part of the spellbook. Same thing with Charm Woodland Creature. So if you don't have those, don't worry about that too much. So we're going to throw that over here. That's not something we're really ever going to use. To access the Moonkin form, we need to have our balance affinity anyway. So unless we've taken the balance affinity, we can't even shapeshift into the right form to use that ability. Next up, we have Frenzied Regeneration. So this is going to be part of our core rotation, the stuff that we are using quite frequently. And we're going to put that down here on our main action bar over on the left side, Frenzy Regeneration is one of our rage spending abilities. It costs 10 rage, it's instant cast, has a 35-second recharge, and it requires bear form. And it has 2 charges. There's a lot going on with this ability, but what you need to know is you need a little bit of rage to use it. It has 2 charges, so once you use a charge, you can be recharging another one. And this is going to heal you for 24% of your maximum health over 3 seconds, guaranteed. So the way this works is it ticks 4 times. As soon as you hit the button, you get 6% of your maximum health healed, and then every second after that for 3 seconds, you get another 6% healed. So this is our version of self-healing, and because it is percentage based, it's always going to do the same amount of our health bar, no matter how much or how little health we have. So that's a really nice heal. The fact that it has 2 charges means that if you needed to hit both of these really quickly, you could heal 48% of your health pretty rapidly if you really needed to. But this is something we're going to use pretty often whenever we feel like, we want to help the healer out or we get into a sticky situation. Next up, we have Growl. Growl is a utility ability. It's our taunt for the Druid. This is instant cast, has an 8-second cooldown, and it does require bear form. This taunts the target to attack you. This will increase your threat generation a little bit as well. So if there is a target that you feel like you just don't have under control, you can target that enemy and then cast Growl and get them to attack you right away. If you ever cast Growl and the enemy doesn't attack you right away, chances are they have some sort of focus on a particular target, and because of that, you're not able to influence them no matter how much threat you have or whether or not you use a taunt. So try to pay attention to that. If you feel like you cast the ability on the right enemy and they just kind of ignored you, that's probably why. Next up, we have Hibernate. Hibernate is a crowd control ability, so we'll put that down here. This does cost us some mana. This is one of the abilities that will remove us from our bear form, so we're probably not going to use this very often. This will force a target to sleep for 40 seconds. Any damage taken will cancel the effect. Only one target can be asleep, and it has a limited range of enemy types that it can work on. This only works on beasts and dragonkin. Next up, we have Incapacitating Roar. This is a crowd control ability as well. This is instant cast with a 30-second cooldown. It invokes the spirit of Ursol, who is like the big bear spirit for the druids, to let loose a deafening roar. This incapacitates all enemies within 10 yards for 3 seconds. Any damage taken will cancel the effect. So you can use this a couple different ways. So the incapacitate for 3 seconds is nice. Chances are that target is going to take damage pretty fast unless you're working with a really coordinated group. But what you can do is you can use your incapacitating roar as an interrupt for some different abilities. So if a couple people are casting fireballs near you, then you can use incapacitating roar to interrupt multiple abilities at the same time. Next up, we have Iron Fur. This is part of our core rotation. This is our primary defensive ability that we're going to be using. This is a instant cast ability. It has a half-second cooldown, and it costs 45 rage. So you're almost never going to be waiting on the cooldown for Iron Fur. What you really need to worry about is having enough rage to cast it. Now, what does Iron Fur do? It increases your armor for 7 seconds. Multiple uses of this ability may overlap. So what that means is, let's just say this is going to increase my armor by 2,000 for 7 seconds. If I cast this, then for 7 seconds, I'm going to have 2,000 increased armor. If 3 seconds in I cast Iron Fur again, then those abilities are going to overlap. And what that means is I've had 3 seconds of plus 2,000 armor. I'll have 4 seconds of plus 4,000 armor, because I'll have 4 seconds of the first Iron Fur that I caught, because I'll have because I'll have 4 seconds of the first Iron Fur that I cast left, and the first 4 seconds of the new Iron Fur going at the same time. So they layer on top of each other, and I'll have 4,000 increased armor. Then after that initial 7 seconds, that first Iron Fur goes away, and I have 3 seconds left of that second Iron Fur where I'll have 2,000 armor. Hopefully that makes sense. This is pretty different from the way most abilities in WoW tend to work as far as, stacking and things. So the overlap is really nice. So if you just needed a ton of damage reduction, you could cast Iron Fur, wait for the half-second cooldown, cast it again, and for about 6 seconds or so, 5 or 6 seconds, you'd have that 4,000 increased armor. And then at the tail end of that, you'd have 2,000 for maybe a second or so. So you can get a big bulk amount of that Iron Fur armor increase going. Or if you'd rather have 2,000 armor for a long period of time, then what you do is you cast Iron Fur, you get 2,000 extra armor. And when you've got, a second or so left, then you cast it again. And then they don't overlap, and you just have a really long duration 2,000 increase on your armor. So hopefully that makes sense. If you do have any questions about that or need clarification, feel free to comment in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to answer your questions. Next up, we have Mangle. Mangle is also part of our core rotation. This is our primary ability that's going to generate rage for us to use on other spells. So this is an instant cast ability with a 5.8 second cooldown. This does require bear form. It's going to deal damage, and it's also going to generate 8 rage. It will also deal additional damage against bleeding targets. And we'll come back and address that again once we see some of the ways that we're able to cause targets to bleed. Next up, we have Maul. Maul is also part of our core rotation, and Maul is what's known as a resource dump ability. Essentially, this ability is something you almost never want to cast unless you feel like you're going to be wasting rage. And so what I mean by that is you may be in a situation where you are generating rage and you don't need to use Iron Fur or one of your other rage spending abilities for defense or whatever the case may be, and you're just kind of going, well, I don't need to use any of this stuff. I don't want to use it right now because I want to have it available to me later. But you're getting to the point where if you continue to generate rage, you're going to generate more than the maximum amount you're allowed to have. So you can have 100 rage generally, unless you have, something affecting that. And so what'll happen is you'll generate rage, and let's say, we're using our Mangle here. It generates 8 rage. We have 95 rage, which means that the next Mangle we cast is going to give us 5 rage to get us to 100, and then 3 is just going to be wasted. At that point, instead of casting Mangle again to generate more rage, or let's say that we had a full rage bar already, we already had 100, if you were going to cast Mangle, you would just be wasting 8 rage. So in that circumstance, if you don't have something else you want to spend rage on, you cast Maul. Maul will eat up 45 rage and allow you to get back into generating rage and just kind of doing your normal stuff for tanking. And then when you get to the point where, once again, you're up there close to the cap and you don't really want to spend your rage on anything else, you could just cast them all again just to get rid of some of that rage. So essentially what we don't want to do here is we don't want to generate resources that we can't use. So if it looks like that's going to happen, we just use some resources on Maul so it doesn't. Our next ability is Moonfire. Moonfire is a utility ability. It's also kind of part of our core rotation. It's up to you. You can add it down here or add it up there, whatever makes sense to you. This is an instant cast ability with a 40-yard range. So this is one of the few really long distance abilities that we have. It is usable in bear form, so it's not going to shapeshift you out. This causes a quick beam of lunar light to burn the enemy for some arcane damage initially, then it's going to burn them for a much larger portion of damage over 16 seconds. So this doesn't count as a bleed, but it does count as an ability that will be dealing damage to the enemy over time and continuing to generate threat for you. Also, you can cast Moonfire on multiple targets. So if you want to get your main target set up with Moonfire, and then some point when you can weave it in, you could cast Moonfire on your secondary and tertiary targets and just kind of, spread that dot around, so that'll just continue to help you to generate threat on enemies. Next up, we have Prowl. Prowl is the other ability that I mentioned you may want to switch into cat form for. This will activate cat form and place you into stealth. I treat this as a utility ability. I actually will put this over here on the right hand side. This is where I put utility abilities that I don't think we're going to be using too often, or maybe you're not using them in combat. Prowl is going to put you into cat form and make you go stealth right away. So once you're in combat, you can't get back into stealth. So this is something you're going to do if you're wanting to sneak past a particular area or something like that. So nifty ability to have available, especially out in the open world. Not quite as neat in the dungeons unless everybody in your party is able to go stealth and sneak past entire groups of enemies. Next up, we have Rake. That's one of the abilities from the Feral Affinity talent that I talked about earlier, so we're going to skip that. Next, we have Rebirth. Rebirth is a battle res, and this is a utility ability, so we'll throw this down here. And essentially what this does, it costs 30 rage, so you have to have the rage available to spend this, but it is an instant cast, 40-yard range ability, and has a 10-minute cooldown. What this does is you can pick one of your allies and you can restore them to life with 100% health and 20% mana. This is castable in combat, that's why it's called a battle res, and you can also use it in any of your shapeshift forms. So let's say that you're tanking, your group is struggling, your healer goes down. Well, instead of trying to just deal with it, you can turn, you can target your healer, cast Rebirth, and bring them back to life. Now, they are only going to have 20% mana, so it kind of depends on what they can do with that. Or if you feel like you're right there at the edge of finishing this boss fight, and you just need that one DPS guy to get back up and keep plugging away, then you can cast Rebirth on that. Now, note, you can't use this to bring yourself back to life because you have to be able to cast the ability. So it's not quite as neat as like a Warlock Soulstone or something like that, but this is something that we have available. Next up, we have Regrowth. Regrowth is kind of, I would consider it a defensive ability under most circumstances, but it's more of a utility ability when it comes to tanking. This will heal a friendly target for a nice burst and then a small amount of healing over 12 seconds. It costs a good chunk of mana, has a 1.4 second cast and a 40-yard range, but it shapeshifts us out of our bear form, and therefore it's not something that we're going to be using on a regular basis. Next, we have Remove Corruption. This is another kind of utility ability we probably won't be using all that often. It costs 1300 mana, has a 40-yard range, instant cast with an 8-second cooldown. It will nullify corrupting effects on the friendly target, removing all curse and poison effects. This will pop you out of your bear form, and that's the main reason why we probably won't be using it very often when we're tanking. Next up, we have Revive. We're going to put that over here with our Miscellaneous. This is our out-of-combat resurrection ability. So if we, finish a particular pull, but someone died, after the pull's over, we can pop out to our regular form, cast Revive, and bring someone back to life. Next up, we have Rip. That's from the Feral Affinity, so we're going to be skipping that. We have Shred. This is your basic kind of attack ability if you're in cat form. We're not going to be using this, so rather than go ahead and put this on the bar, I'm just going to leave it here in the book for now. If you do find yourself going into cat form a lot, then you'll want to put this onto your action bar. Next up, we have Skull Bash. This is a utility movement ability. This has a 13-yard range. It's instant with a 15-second cooldown, and you have to be in either your cat form or bear form to use it. This will charge to the target and bash them in the skull, which will interrupt their spell cast and prevent any spell in the same school from being cast for 4 seconds. So this is kind of your basic interrupt that you have when you are in bear form. Next up, we have Soothe. This is a utility ability. It will soothe the target and get rid of any enrage effects. So this is handy if you do have an enemy that's going to enrage pretty frequently. You do have the ability to kind of counteract that. This is going to use some mana, which means it's going to shapeshift you out of your bear form if you cast it, so don't use it unless you absolutely have to. Next up, we have Stag Form. Stag Form allows you to shapeshift into a mountable stag form, so someone else can ride around on your back. This increases your movement speed by 40%, so it's faster than cat form. It gives you the protection from polymorph effects and the ability to be freed from movement impairing effects. So you may ask, well, why don't I just use this instead of cat form if I'm trying to get from point A to point B in the quickest way possible? That's because stag form is only usable outdoors. So if you're not in an outdoor environment, you can't use it. And that's why a lot of times in dungeons in particular and raids, you'll end up using cat form for the additional movement speed to get from place to place. Our next ability is Stampeding Roar. That is a movement utility ability. Instant cast with a 1-minute cooldown. You let loose a wild roar, increasing the movement speed of all friendly players within 15 yards by 60% for 8 seconds. So this is kind of like a dash that you can use on everybody who's around you. So it's a multi-target dash. Help your friends run faster, kind of a thing. So you'll get some use out of this if if you're in a situation where everybody needs some additional speed in order to stay out of bad effects during a boss fight, or if you're all just moving from room to room, or maybe some of the party's gone ahead and you're trying to bring up the rear with someone who is straggling. Then you can use Stampeding Roar to help everybody get up there. Our next ability is Survival Instincts, and this is our other big defensive ability that we have. This is an instant cast ability with a 4-minute recharge. It has 2 charges, and it will reduce all damage you take by 50% for 6 seconds. So if you're in a bad situation or some really big damage is coming, then you're going to cast Survival Instincts. You're going to reduce that by 50%. And go about your day, continue tanking, knowing that, you prevented a lot of damage. And with the 2 charges here, that means that, you can use one of them up, and while you're waiting for the other to recharge, still kind of have one in reserve in case things do take a turn for the worst. Our next ability here is Swipe. Swipe is part of our core rotation. This ability costs nothing and has no cooldown, and it's instant cast. It has an 8-yard range, and it swipes nearby enemies, dealing damage to them. It's a small amount of damage, and this is basically the button you hit when there's nothing else going on. It doesn't generate rage. It doesn't do really anything other than some damage and help you maintain a little bit of threat. So if you don't have rage to cast a particular ability and your mangle is on cooldown, then you're going to be swiping. Also, swiping is good to use against multiple targets to help you gain threat on them initially when you're first doing the pull. The other ability that you're going to use along with that is actually Thrash, which is our next ability. Thrash is a instant cast ability with a 5.8 second cooldown. It has an 8-yard range, and it does require bear form. So this generates some rage for you. It generates 5 rage. Not quite as much as Mangle, but a nice amount. And this will strike all nearby enemies, dealing damage as a bleed, and then also adding an additional damage over time bleed to them that lasts 15 seconds. When you apply this ability from bear form, you're able to stack that effect up to 3 times. So you can get that initial bleed damage, and then you can get the bleed damage that will last for 15 seconds stacked 3 times. So this is where the majority of your bleed damage is going to come from, and having Thrash on targets is going to mean that your Mangle will deal 20% additional damage to them. So that combo of Thrash into Mangle is going to allow you to deal more damage and maintain more threat on each of the enemies. Next, we have Travel Form. This is another shapeshift form. It shapeshifts you into a animal form that is suitable to the location that you're in. So there's a couple of different things that you can turn into here. So you can turn into like the stag form, or something equivalent to that, where you're going to run faster outdoors. Like if I shapeshift into that now, you're going to see it turns me into my travel form here. That's going to give me some increased movement speed as long as I'm out of combat. However, if I'm in the water, this will shapeshift me into a form that can breathe underwater and move faster underwater. And then also, if I'm in an area where I'm able to fly, this will shapeshift me into a bird, and then I can fly around with the same speed as whatever my mount training is currently giving me. So this is a nice kind of one size fits all sort of button to push. If you're just trying to get from point A to point B and you're not in combat, this is definitely the button to hit. Alright, our final active ability that we have is Treant Form. This will allow you to shapeshift into your Treant Form, which does pretty much nothing for you if you are spec'd as Guardian. So you should never hit this button unless you're just doing it for the looks, because you want to look like a tree. Now that we've covered all the active abilities, let's take a look at our passive ones and see what those might do to influence some of our other abilities. So first off, we have our aquatic form. I mentioned this earlier with the travel form. This will increase your swim speed by 100% and allow you to breathe underwater. Feline swiftness we got from the feral affinity and the talents, so we're skipping that. Our flight form allows you to fly and increases your movement speed. And like I said, the movement speed here is going to be tied to whatever your flight training gives you. Next up, we have Gore. So Thrash, Swipe, Moonfire, and Maul. So let's recap those real quick. Thrash is our ability that puts the bleeds on people. Swipe is our kind of filler, totally free, doesn't do a lot ability. So we got Thrash and Swipe, and those are both good against multiple targets. Then we have our Moonfire, which is our little lunar beam that we can cast that does damage over time. Then we also have Maul, which is our resource dump ability. So those abilities, two kind of single target abilities and two kind of multi-target abilities, have a 15% chance to reset the cooldown on Mangle and cause it to generate additional rage. So this is going to give us the ability to cast Mangle more often. Mangle is the ability we have that generates the most rage for us, so it generates 8 rage as far as our normal rotation goes. And if we get this Gore ability to proc, then it means that we can cast it sooner, and when we do cast it, we'll actually get 12 rage out of that Mangle instead of just the normal 8. So this passive helps us to build rage faster. And it's important to try to cast Mangle every time you get a Gore proc to generate that additional rage, unless for some reason you're close to the cap and you don't need it, and then you want to sneak that Maul in and get some of that rage out of the way for your next Mangle with the increased rage generation from Gore. Next up, we have Lightning Reflexes. You gain dodge equal to 100% of your critical strike from gear. Dodge is one of the big ways that druids mitigate damage. You get quite a lot of dodge chance from having that critical strike from your gear and from having a lot of agility. Next up, we have our Mastery Nature's Guardian. This increases your maximum health and healing received by 10.1%. Also increases your attack power by 20.3%. Those numbers will be a little bit different depending on how much mastery you have. One thing to note is that the healing from your frenzied regeneration is not increased by the 10% increased healing that you get from your mastery because it's a set percentage, but because your maximum health is increased by your mastery, that means that ultimately you're getting a larger heal from frenzied regeneration because that percentage of your health is a bigger number than if you had less health. So if you've got 100 health and you heal 24% of it, you're healing 24 health. If you've got 1,000, you're healing 240 health. And then finally we have Thick Hide. This reduces all damage taken by 6% and helps us have a little bit more survivability and a little bit more tankiness to our character. So one quick utility sort of weird thing I wanted to point out about druids here is that your action bars change depending on the shapeshift form that you're in. So right now I'm in bear form, and you'll notice if I switch out of bear form, a bunch of my abilities are gone. And so If I go into cat form, my abilities are different here. If I go into moonkin form, they're different. The travel form, stag form, treant form, and your regular form all have the same action bar. But if you go into bear, cat, or moonkin, you get a different action bar. So pay attention to that. If for some reason you're in bear form and you're looking at this and you get popped out of your bear form and you're going, where's Mangle? Where's Mangle? It's on your bear action bar. So just shapeshift back into bear and all your abilities will be there. Don't freak out. So we know what our abilities do. How do we take all that knowledge and translate it into the rotation that we need to perform in order to tank? That's what I'm going to go over now. Now, before we get started, take a look at the action bar. Everything is in the same section. I did kind of move things around a little bit, sort of to fit my own little preference here. That being said, let's get started. So first off, you have really 3 ways that you can initiate combat, that you can do the pull. And your main ways that you could do that is, one, you could just kind of waltz into the enemies here and say, hey guys, and that's going to aggro the enemies onto you. Chances are you may do that from time to time if you're like pulling one group of enemies into another group of enemies, or if for whatever reason it just seems to make sense. Another way that you can initiate the pull is you can pick an enemy and you can cast your Moonfire. So that's got that 40-yard range, and that's going to give you the ability to pull enemies from far away. So obviously, this enemy would have aggro to you and come over. They would be headed over as well. At that point, you can move in there and start doing some of your rotation. Or if you're a good distance away, you could always go ahead and hit that Moonfire and kind of tab target over and just kind of throw out a Moonfire on everybody. The nice thing about Moonfire, it doesn't cost any resources and it's instant cast with no cooldown, so you can pretty quickly go ahead and get those Moonfires on a bunch of different targets at the same time. The last way that you can kind of get engaged here is to use one of your charge style abilities. In this case, you'd be using a Skull Bash. That has a 13-yard range. As you can see, that's a lot shorter, but you can use that to charge right in and bash one of your targets. The only thing with that is, you're wasting your interrupt right there at the outset of the fight when you might want to have it available to you anyway. So generally speaking, I tend to either walk into the group or use the Moonfire cast to pull something in towards me. So once you have the enemies engaged, you've kind of got 3 scenarios. Either you're facing a single priority target, you're facing a group of enemies, or you're facing a boss. And what you do is going to vary depending on which one of those scenarios that you're in. So let's look at the typical case, right? You're just fighting a normal dungeon pack. You've got, 3 to 5 enemies that you're fighting. Let's say you did your Moonfire pull and now you've come in. The first thing you want to do is get as much threat built up on all those targets as possible. So what I would recommend doing is kicking things off with a Thrash. So Thrash is going to deal damage to all those targets around you. So you can see they've all got this bleed on them. So that's going to give you an initial bit of damage. Then it's going to give you the bleed as well. You can follow Thrash up with a couple of swipes. So you go in and you hit Thrash and then swipe, swipe, and swipe. However many swipes until you feel comfortable with the amount of aggro that you have. At that point, you're going to pick your priority target and you're going to kind of switch into your single target rotation, keeping in mind that you want to keep casting Thrash until each target has 3 stacks. So if we look at this, we cast Thrash. He's got 1 stack of this. This is going to be coming off cooldown here. We can cast another one. So that's going to double up the amount of bleed and also refresh the duration. So once this comes around again, boom, we've got 3 stacks, and that's going to apply to all of the enemies around us. That's going to give you a nice amount of damage on each of those targets. That bleed is going to, ensure that you're continuing to generate threat on those targets while you and hopefully the rest of your DPS are focused on a single priority target. Now, once you are ready for that priority target, then you're going to go into the more typical rotation. And what you're going to want to do here is you're going to want to cast Mangle pretty much on cooldown to build Rage. So you can see our Rage is building up here. So we'd want to hit Mangle. And then while Mangle is going on, that's where you have all your other options while you're waiting on Mangle to come off cooldown. Once Mangle's off cooldown, you cast it again and generate some rage. So let's look at a couple of the different scenarios here and when we would want to use each of these different abilities. So we've got our initial threat on the group. We're going to cast Mangle against our main target. Mangle's on cooldown. Now what? Well, if you're not at 3 stacks of the bleed from Thrash, you want to cast Thrash. If you are at 3 stacks of Thrash, you don't want to waste Thrash on another one. You want to wait till it drops down to 2 and then cast Thrash and get it back up to 3 and try to maintain 3 stacks at all times and not just cast Thrash kind of willy-nilly. So instead, what you can do if you're facing multiple targets is you can hit swipe. Okay, so let's pretend we have 3 stacks of Thrash on this target. We hit Mangle. We don't want to cast Thrash again, so this is where we can start swiping. And you can see that's doing damage to all 3 of these targets. So that's what you can do if you do already have the bleeds from Thrash. So cast Mangle. If you don't have 3 stacks of Thrash, cast Thrash. If you do, or if Thrash is on cooldown, you can cast Swipe. Now, as we're doing this, we're going to be generating rage. We don't have a lot of it right now, but let's say that, you know, we're getting up there, we're getting pretty close to our rage cap here. Then if that were the case, and let's go ahead, we're just going to build up some rage here as fast as we can. So we're getting pretty close to the rage cap here. So we're at 90 rage. So if we cast another Thrash or something, we're going to be really close. So let's say we, you know, here we're capped on our energy. This is when we want to go ahead and cast Maul. Now, if you watch the bar, Maul takes a huge chunk of rage off there. So we can go right back into our Mangles and our Thrashes, which are going to generate more rage for us. So that, here again, I would probably cast a Mangle on a target and just get rid of some rage. That way you're not generating rage that isn't being used towards something. And Maul does do a pretty good amount of damage to a single target, so it is worth casting. You just don't want to cast it unless you have to, because you'd rather spend that rage on other abilities. Now, as that's going along, you're tanking, so we're taking damage, you know, obviously from multiple different enemies or maybe just from a boss. So our other consideration here is when do we use our defensive abilities that are part of our core rotation? And we have 2 of those. We have our Iron Fur and our Frenzied Regeneration. Both of these cost rage. Frenzied Regeneration only costs 10 rage, and you will generate rage from getting attacked as well. So you don't have to generate all of your rage purely from your abilities. You'll get some rage from doing that and also from getting hit. So usually you can cast Frenzied Regeneration just about any time that you want to, because it's really easy to get up to 10 rage pretty quickly. You just cast like a Mangle, and you know, we're at 12 rage right now. Boom, pop Frenzied Regeneration. And remember, that's going to regenerate 24% of our health over 3 seconds. So, if we're in a position where we feel like maybe we could help the healer out, or we know that we're not going to need these in a quick pinch, you can cast your Frenzied Regeneration, but you're going to want to make sure that you get the full benefit of the healing. So usually, Frenzied Regeneration is something that I would consider using when I'm at about 33 or percent or a third of my health bar. That way I know if I hit this, I'm going to get some healing from it. Maybe my healer catches up and throws a couple heals on me, and a good portion of that healing is actually going to be used and not just totally wasted. More often though, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to build up enough rage. So remember, Mangle, Swipe, Thrash, these don't use rage. 2 of them generate and 1 of them doesn't do anything. So you're only using Maul to dump rage. When you get rage, you want to spend it on Iron Fur. So we're going to get in here and we're going to get our Mangle, we're going to get our Thrash, we got a reset on Mangle. Both those are off cooldown, so we're going to swipe. Thrash is back up, we're at 2 stacks, we're going to Mangle, we're going to swipe. We got another Mangle here. This is where you've built up enough, you cast an Iron Fur, and you now have Iron Fur available to you for the 7 seconds that the buff is up for. So once again, after you've cast an Iron Fur, you just go right back into your regular rotation, and then you could cast another Iron Fur. We're going into Swipe here. We got another Thrash. We got a Mangle reset. A Swipe. We got a Mangle reset. Thrash. We're at 3 stacks. We're getting pretty close. Let's cast an Iron Skin. Then we're going to go back in. Keep those Thrash stacks up. And you can see we're building up here, and we're out of Iron Fur, but not quite, and we were getting close to the cap, and that might have been a time where we wanted to maul this target. So, if you're in a situation where you're going against multiple kind of normal enemies, engage, with your Moonfire or something like that. Go ahead and get your Thrash going. Get a couple swipes off just to generate enough threat to make sure that all the enemies are attacking you. Then pick your priority target and go into your cycle of cast Mangle, cast Thrash if you don't have 3 stacks, cast Swipe if you do have 3 stacks or both those abilities are on cooldown, use Maul to dump Rage if for some reason you need to, and use Iron Fur to give yourself the defensive buff when you have enough Rage to cast it. That's kind of the basic cycle. If you were going against just a single opponent, then you're basically going to do the same thing, except instead of going in with the Thrash into swipes, you can go in and do your initial Thrash against that one target. The reason you want to do that is because you want the bleed on the target. Because you'll go Thrash into Mangle, and then, let's say we only have the one target here. We'll go in, we'll Thrash, we'll Mangle to make sure that we have that 20% increased damage on our Mangle. You can keep building up your Thrash stacks until you have 3, because it's always good to have a bunch of those. If you don't need the defensive perks from Iron Fur and you are going up against a single target, I would recommend using Maul because it does a big chunk of damage to the target. If you need the defense bonus from Iron Fur, cast Iron Fur. Kind of judge the situation there. If it's a priority target, but they're not really doing a lot of damage to you, then help your group out, help them deal more damage, spend your Rage on Maul. But if it's a situation where okay, I need to play defensively, then go ahead and continue to use your Iron Fur like normal. And then Swipe, you're just going to use as a filler, really no matter what you're doing. You're going to do a pretty similar thing for a boss, except for on a boss, you're probably going to need to use Iron Fur every time and not focused on Maul. That's also the situation where you probably are going to have to use a Frenzied Regeneration. So that's the general overview of the rotation and how you're going to play on a Guardian Druid. Quick recap, Moonfire, or whatever you want to engage. Usually you're fighting multiple enemies, so Thrash into Mangle into Swipe, and then continue to use Thrash to 3 stacks, use Mangle whenever it's off cooldown, use Swipe in between, Maul to dump, Iron Fur to give yourself a nice defensive bonus, Frenzy Regeneration when your health bar is down to about 33% or a third, or whenever the panic sets in for you, then that's a good time to cast it. Alright, so now that we have gone over the rotation, the next thing we want to do is get into our talents and create ourselves a passive talent build. And when I say passive talent build, I really mean we want to select talents that are going to benefit us without adding additional complexity to the rotation we already need to learn. My goal is for you to be able to take the talent build that we create, go into a dungeon, and just practice the rotation that we talked about without having to add extra abilities or weird ways to use abilities that you already have based on what you've gotten from your talent build. So with that in mind, this is not going to be the best build for tanking, especially at higher levels, but what this is going to do is provide you with something to start with so that you can learn the foundation of the class, and then when you feel comfortable, you can start changing your talents and using some of the more complex stuff and adding new buttons to push into your rotation. So we're going to go over each of the talents and talk about what they do and why we've chosen them. Kicking things off here with Brambles. So Brambles is a passive ability. Most of the abilities that we've picked are. This Causes sharp brambles to protect you, absorbing and reflecting up to 320 damage from each attack. So we get a little bit of damage reduction and a little bit of reflected damage as well. So that gives us a little bit more survivability, a little bit more threat generation. It's not a super significant amount. This is not the best talent for tanking on here, but we got a little bit of synergy going on that you're going to see later on. And also, this is a nice kind of set it forget it talent. It's just going to provide you with a nice passive bonus without you having to worry about it. And that's kind of the theme behind most of the abilities we're going to see here. Next up, we have Tiger Dash. So Tiger Dash is an ability that's going to replace Dash. If we go ahead and switch out of this, you can see that Dash, we've got our instant cast, 2-minute cooldown, 60% increased speed in cat form for 10 seconds. Tiger Dash changes that to a 45-second cooldown. So we have over a minute in cooldown reduction on this ability, meaning we can use it way more often. Also, it still activates cat form, but it gives us a 200% movement speed bonus instead of a 60% movement speed bonus. So a huge increase on the amount of speed that we get. That speed does decay over time, over 5 seconds. So instead of lasting 10 seconds, we only get the buff for 5 seconds, but we get to use it more often, and it's a heck of a lot faster. So this is going to allow you more opportunities to practice using Dash as a way to get out of an AoE or move from room to room. It'll be a little bit of an adjustment when you switch back to a regular Dash, but that's okay. Once you've gotten comfortable and you're ready to change up your talent build, you're probably going to be picking up Wild Charge, and this gives you a different movement ability for each of your different shapeshift forms, so it adds a lot of complication. And so really, right now, we just want to stick with the basics, Tiger Dash, get to use that more often. Next up, we've switched over to the Balance Affinity from the Feral. You don't need to know anything about the abilities that we gain from switching over to this affinity. We're not going to use them. You do gain the ability now to shapeshift into Moonkin form, which I talked about earlier when I was discussing the Flap ability, but you really shouldn't be in that form. It's a tanky caster, but you just need to be a tank, not a tanky caster, so you should be in bear form. Really, we're picking this up because of Astral Influence. This says increase the range of all your abilities by 3 yards. So that's really nice. That's going to take our Thrash from being an 8-yard ability to an 11. It's going to take our Mangle from a 5-yard to an 8. It's going to give us increased range on our Moonfire. And basically what this will allow you to do is it'll allow you to generate threat in a wider area. When you're, doing your thrash or your swipe, it allows you to pick up more enemies. It allows you to kind of tank without having to worry about your positioning being super precise. So that's why we're picking this affinity up, is for that increased range. Next up, we have Mighty Bash. Now, this is the only ability that we do have to add to our action bar, and all the talents on this particular tier are abilities that you'd have to do that for. So we really don't have a choice. There's nothing really passive for us to pick here. But Mighty Bash is an ability that I personally really like, and I use in pretty much every build that I have. Mighty Bash, which I went ahead and put down here on the crowd control section of the bar, is a stun. It has an 8-yard range, thanks to our balance affinity. 50-second cooldown, it's instant cast, and it will stun the target for 5 seconds. It's usable in all your shapeshift forms. So this gives you a way to interrupt the target, or if you just want to lock down a particular target because they're a priority and you just want to minimize the impact that they have on the fight, then you can use this stun to do that. So now with Mighty Bash, we have our Skull Bash, we have our Incapacitating Roar, and we have our Mighty Bash. 3 different ways to interrupt abilities, all with some other kind of various uses as well. So we're going to pick that up. You can feel free, if you're not a big fan of Mighty Bash, you can take either one of these. I would recommend Typhoon over Mass Entanglement, but if you just want to mess around, you could pick a different talent on this tier, no problem. Next, we have Soul of the Forest. Mangle generates 5 more rage and deals 25% more damage. So remember, Mangle is our bread and butter rage generator. We get a little bit of rage from Thrash, but we get 8 rage from Mangle. Now we're going to get 13 rage every time we Mangle. In addition, we're going to get 25% increased damage. And then, anytime we're hitting a bleeding target, we get that 20% bonus as well. So this is going to turn our Mangle into just a big powerhouse. It's going to hit hard. It's going to generate a lot of rage. And because of that, we're going to be able to generate that rage a lot faster. That's going to give you the ability to practice using your Iron Fur more often and also using your Maul as a rage dump more often, because you're going to be generating more rage, so you're going to run into those situations where you need to go, oh, I need to hit Maul and get rid of some rage more often. So this actually it could be like a detriment in a way, but really, we want to practice that mindfulness of paying attention to our resources and knowing when to dump with Maul versus when to use our Iron for defensive purposes. Next, we have Survival of the Fittest. This will reduce the cooldowns of Bark Skin and Survival Instincts by 33%. So remember Bark Skin, we talked about that earlier. This is our ability that we want to use that is going to give us our 20% damage reduction. Now, instead of having a 90-second cooldown, it has a 60-second cooldown. So we can use this much more often. And there's an added perk here because of brambles. The second paragraph here says, while Bark Skin is active, the brambles also deal nature damage to all nearby enemies every second. So anytime we hit Bark Skin, we're going to pulse that damage out for 12 seconds. So we get this additional added bonus of anytime we hit Bark Skin for damage reduction, we also get a little damage output as well. And I don't recommend that you change the way you're using Bark Skin. Don't start hitting Bark Skin because you're like, oh, I'm going to pulse damage now. Don't do that. Still just use Bark Skin, frequently because it only has a minute cooldown, but in situations where you need the 20% damage reduction. That's much more important than the little bit of damage pulse that you're going to get from the Brambles talent. That's just an added bonus. So anytime you hit Bark Skin, you get a nice perk. Also, Survival Instincts is our big, huge main defensive cooldown that we have, and it's now gone from a 4-minute cooldown to a 2.7-minute cooldown. So this means you can use this way more often. That is a huge reduction in cooldown. This is going to give you the ability to practice using this much more often. And overall, it should help you with your survivability because you have more opportunities to hit that oh crap button when you need to. And then finally, our last talent here is going to be Rend and Tear. This ability says, while in bear form, which is the form we should be in most of the time, Thrash, our big AoE bleed ability, also increases your damage dealt to the target and reduces your damage taken from the target by 2% per application of Thrash. So, if you follow the rotation that I talked about earlier, you're going to know, okay, I need to try to maintain 3 stacks of Thrash at all times. And if you have those 3 stacks on the target, because of Rend and Tear, you're going to get 6% damage reduction from each of those targets, and you're going to deal 6% increased damage to each of those targets as well. So Thrash hits everything around you, which means that as long as you're keeping those stacks up, you're getting damage reduction for everything around you, and you're dealing increased damage to everything around you as well. So this is just gonna once again kind of add a nice bonus on top of what you should already be doing. And all around, this build should help you to output more damage in order to maintain threat, give you a little bit of damage reduction as well, give you some additional utility with your abilities, and most importantly, allow you to just focus on practicing the main rotation that we talked about. So that's the talent build, and now that we've covered over that, the last thing to do here is take this talent build, take everything that we've learned from the video, and go apply that in an actual dungeon. Alright, so we're loading into Freehold here, and take a look around. Looks like we got everybody in. Our healer is getting healed up, so we'll go ahead and let them get back up real quick. In the meantime, I'm probably just going to pull here with Moonfire. I'll wait for that Pat to go by. So we're going to grab them, pull them over. We'll go up, we're going to Thrash, we're going to get a swipe or so in here. Then we're going to start mangling. Throw some swipes and mangles. So here, this group of enemies is not particularly complex, so I'm not going to worry too much about whether or not... I'm not going to worry too much about my health here. The main thing I need to do here is just kind of stay out of the green stuff. But as you can see, I'm almost full rage, full health. My healer's doing pretty well here, so we'll go ahead and we'll pick up this group here. This is a situation where I kind of want to pull with Moonfire, so go up, hit my Thrash, get a couple of swipes in, start mangling on my main target. I'm going to go ahead and cast Iron Fur, since I'm kind of up there as far as my rage is concerned. And I do want to go ahead and minimize the impact that these enemies are going to have. Just help my healer out here a little bit. You never know when things are going to kind of go south. And now we should be able to skirt around these enemies here. Just go up the path. Nope. Okay, so here I'm going to mangle. I'm going to come over here, kind of thrash, and with that increased range from the talent, that's going to allow me to pick those enemies up pretty quickly. Go ahead and thrash again. I am capped out on my rage, so I should use a maul, or I should use an Iron Fur there, one way or the other. You know, sometimes things are chaotic and you forget, but when you look up there and you go, oh, my rage is capped, you know, just make sure that you go ahead and cast your Iron Fur or whatever it may be. So we're going to pull here. We got a couple of groups here, so this is actually going to be pretty rough. I'm going to pull everything over. I'm going to go ahead and get Iron Fur going. And I'm going to use my Bark Skin to get some damage reduction. And here I am just kind of spamming some of my AoEs a little bit. Get Iron Fur going again. I'm going to go ahead and get that. It's kind of a not great situation to be in. The one thing we don't want to do is we don't want to get knocked off the edge here. And it also looks like, let's go ahead and hit Survival Instincts. It looks like we need to pick up these groups here. So we're full on rage again. Let's use our Iron Fur. This is pretty chaotic. This has happened. This has happened a few times in this dungeon. So really, all I'm trying to do right here is maintain threat. Like that's my job. Maintain threat. Use my defensive abilities. So I'm not paying too much attention to my main rotation at the moment. I'm just trying to ensure that as best as I can, everything is attacking me, and I am staying out of as much crap as I possibly can. You've got Moonfire for this situation here where, you know, this enemy is kind of standing in that stuff, and I don't want to go over there because I'm going to take damage if I do. I can use Moonfire to add a little bit of additional damage there. And as you can see, between the rest of our characters and having a pretty good healer there, we did pretty well. We came out of that fight with basically full health. That was pretty nice. I'm pretty sure we need to grab these. Let's do that. We'll get our Thrash. We'll get our Swipe. Plenty of rage. Let's go into an Iron Fur. We can kind of alt-tab through and Moonfire things if we want to. A couple of different options here. Now, the Mangle is good for damage and building rage, but if I'm pretty capped on rage, I can ignore Mangle in favor of, you know, trying to cast another Moonfire or something like that. You can see this is working out pretty well. Alright, our boss is going to come in now. So we're going to pick up the boss, we're going to get our Moonfire. We're going to go ahead and start building up our Thrash stacks. I'm going to zoom out here a little bit. So what we're going to want to do here, we're dumping with Maul. We've got our Iron Fur up. We're going to try to get our Thrash stacks up to 3. And we also want to maintain the Moonfire buff on him as well. If our health does happen to get low enough that we feel like we need to, like right here, that could be a situation where maybe I'd want to consider using like a Frenzied Regeneration. Another thing we can pay attention to here if we're feeling pretty comfortable as far as our health goes is trying to use our various interrupt abilities. So I just use Maul there for a little bit of a rage dump. Now, once battle gets in and it's kind of chaotic, I do tend to just kind of cast Thrash on cooldown, even though I don't necessarily need to. Sometimes I kind of am just in the habit of doing it out of paranoia, like, oh, let me just make sure I have threat on everything around me. But that's absolutely not necessary. I'd want to use it like right there about when Thrash was about to come off of cooldown. Okay, and I need to go ahead and throw a mount on my bar over here, because there are plenty of situations in this dungeon where you want to be mounted. So do that. We're going back into bear form. We're going to grab this guy. We treat him like a boss. You know, we just hit our Moonfire. Start getting our Thrash stacks in there. He's going to go down pretty quickly. And honestly, you know, you can practice as, you know, efficiently as you possibly want to. In a situation like that, where it's low tension, I know we're not going to have a problem with the enemy. Sometimes I'll just mash buttons and give myself a mental break, you know, so that I got a little bit more energy for whatever the next fight is going to be, which is going to be this one here. So let's go ahead and I'm going to Moonfire pull these guys over. All right, and then I'm going to Thrash into Swipe, start mangling. I got stunned. So coming out of a stun, I want to go right back into some AoE because I'm not, you know, entirely sure how much threat I lost during that time that I was stunned. So I usually try to do that as a way to check. Now that's a weird situation where if you actually really wanted to, you could have switched into cap form and gotten reduced damage on the fall. I don't really think it's worth it there, but you could have done it. Let's see, so we're going to pull these guys over. Thrash into Swipe. We're going to Mangle. And we're going to dump some Rage here with Maul. So against this one mob here, I don't feel like I need to cast my Iron Fur. So I'm just going to focus on casting Maul to kind of do some additional damage there. Okay, and somebody pulled these guys, so we're going to pick them up with a Thrash. And you can see how much range I had there, and that is from the talent that we have available to us. So here, I got Moonfire. I'm going to go ahead and dump some Rage. I can tab target for Moonfire. That's another situation that Moonfire is good for. Anytime you have to move out of an AoE like that, and you want to continue to apply damage and threat to a target, you can cast a Moonfire while you're moving around since it's an instant cast. We are playing Follow the Dog at the moment. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this group. Same thing, Thrash into Swipe. Here, like I said, I could start tab targeting through for some Moonfires. I did get stunned, so like I said, I want to come out of that with a Thrash into a Swipe again. Go ahead and cast an Iron Fur. I did get caught with that. Shapeshift to Cat. Shapeshift back to Bear. But you can see I took a ton of damage there, so that's a good time to pop Survival Instincts, or a good time to cast Frenzied Regeneration. That was kind of a fun, panicky sort of moment to show off there, where, you know, in that case, I actually had to use some of my tools as a druid, and that's fun, I think, generally speaking. And as we're doing this, you're going to see me cap on Rage and stuff like that. And that's because I'm trying to explain different things at different times. And that just sort of tends to be how it ends up. So you see there, like, they pulled ahead of me. Sometimes I'm a mean tank, and I just want them to get stomped on a little bit. Like, hey, why don't you let me do my job and pull? But you be whatever kind of tank you want to be. Me, I'm a little bit vindictive sometimes. I feel so slow as a bear trying to get out of those AoEs. Alright, so we're just going to dump into a Maul here. These guys are just about dead. If I hadn't got hit by that AoE, I probably would have switched into an Iron Fur instead. Alright, so here we can Moonfire. We could Growl to get that target to attack us. Dump off some Rage here with our Maul. There we go. Alright. And we're just doing whatever the dog wants us to do. Alright, and we are good now. So we're headed down for the boss fight. We're going to pick up this guy with a faraway Moonfire. Now, with just two enemies like this, I actually would normally feel pretty comfortable going into the boss fight, just pulling these guys over. But I don't want to do that for the purposes of this particular video. Like I said, they're kind of at the end. We're just fighting one guy. That's when I tend to, you know, zone out a little bit. and they pulled this group. We didn't need to pull this group, but they did. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my abilities and my increased range to try to pick up everything here. And this is going to be a bit of a crap situation because my healer took a bunch of damage from that crazy pull. But as you can see, my health is doing pretty good at the moment. Got enough for another iron skin, so let's go ahead and use that. So here we can use a Skull Bash to get back into position. We can go ahead and cast a Moonfire there, cast a Moonfire here. And normally this is a circumstance where, you know, working with any other group, I would probably just throw up a priority target on one of these enemies so that we could focus on killing one of them in particular. But in a random pug like this, that doesn't always do much. So I'm capped out. I'm going to go ahead and Iron Fur again. Now, this is also a spot where, like, say this guy's about to do something, I can go up and I can use my Mighty Bash on him. Stun him, try to interrupt him. Go ahead and Iron Fur again. We can Maul again, since we're getting close to the end of the fight here. I'm just going to do this just to show it off. Well, actually, he's about dead. I was going to show off the battle res, but we don't need it. But we can target them, and we can actually go ahead and do a res. Alright, let's get back into bear form and keep on going. So I think we're going to run into this group here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull them. And just get this taken care of. So we've got a Skull Bash we can use against those targets. Let's go ahead and get our Iron Fur going. So here, I can use my little Skull Bash charge to get over there if I wanted to. Like I said, I don't generally recommend doing that. Because you want to save that for your interrupts. So we're getting close to capping on rage. I kind of want to hold on to my Iron Fur, so maybe I can just maul this target. I'm going to go ahead and pick up this guy too here at the end while he's not around anybody. That way we can focus on him. So we're going to get our 3 stacks of Thrash going. We're going to go ahead and maul. Get rid of some rage. Alright, keep working on that Thrash stacks. We're going to re-up our Moonfire and keep that dot ticking on him. There we go. Alright, let's take these guys. So, get a Moonfire in, walk over, Thrash swipe. Somebody decided to pull this group, so we're going to pop Iron Fur and we're going to Thrash. And we're going to swipe a couple times. We're also going to go ahead and use our Bark Skin here. This is a pretty good time. We could use our Frenzied Regeneration. So right here, the main thing that I'm doing is, instead of focusing on the rotation, I'm trying to focus on using my defensive abilities to keep myself alive and to use my AoE abilities to maintain threat on the targets. And as you can see, for the most part, our party stayed pretty full health there. And I do have a Warlock or something here that they want to keep pulling when I'm not. They want to keep pulling ahead of me. So this is the kind of situation where, I'm liable to just let them die the next time. Because it's my job as a tank to pull, and if they're not going to give me time to maintain aggro, then I have to get into a sort of a panic situation where I'm trying to grab aggro on a bunch of things all at the same time, and I don't have time to, time my defenses. And this is just purely someone being impatient. Alright, so lots of kind of like roleplay stuff here. I'm going to skip through all that and jump ahead to the boss fights. Alright, so we got the first little mini-boss here, so same kind of deal, Moonfire into Thrash, into Mangle, and then now I'm just going to build up a enough rage to go ahead and cast myself an Iron Fur here. We're now at 3 stacks of Thrash. Usually about the time you're at 2.5, 3 stacks of Thrash, that's when you're going to need to re-up your Moonfire, so you can kind of time it that way. And now my health is doing pretty good, and since we're fighting just one target here, I'm going to kind of dump a little bit of rage into casting Maul, just to kind of help get this guy down and kill him a lot faster. There's downtime between the 2 bosses here, so I'll be able to get my health up, you know, pretty easily in between. Alright, we got the Shark Puncher coming up. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to go Moonfire. So Moonfire into Thrash, into Mangle. Get a couple swipes, we're going to Mangle again. We've got enough for an Iron Fur, so we'll use an Iron Fur. And we're at our 3rd Thrash, which means it's probably time for another Moonfire here. We can dump with a Maul. He's about to do a Shark Tornado, so we'll get away from him. And this is where we can, you know, cast another Moonfire. Moonfire does a small amount of damage initially, so you could just kind of spam Moonfire there over and over again if you wanted to. There's not a lot of point to doing that, but I mean, you could do it if you wanted to. So it looks like we need to build up our Thrash stacks again. Go ahead and pop an Iron Fur here. He's going to do another Shark Tornado, so we can kind of sit back and cast Moonfire. This is a good time to cast your Frenzy Regeneration if you need to. Also, since we have the extended range, we might actually be able to swipe him while he's doing his Tornado without getting hit. So somehow we picked up an extra enemy here, that's okay. Now, I don't recommend that you do this, but I'm slightly annoyed with this Warlock that keeps casting before me. This is a really complex section, so I just kind of want to see if he's going to have an itchy trigger finger, and if he is, I'm just going to let him die. That was definitely not his fault, though. He moved, well, I mean, he moved closer than he needed to. So I'm going to tab target through, put a couple Moonfires out here, start working on those Thrash stacks, and we're going to be pretty good there. Alright, so let's grab this group with a Moonfire, Thrash, Swipe. Let's go ahead and get our Maul going in there. We have a Patrol coming. I wanted to try to pull everything down here. It doesn't look like we're going to be able to, so we're going to go in. And we got a bunch of these. Alright, we're going to Thrash, Swipe. We're going to pop our Bark Skin. We're also going to pop our Survival Instincts here, just in case we get hit by one of those odd water spouts, and I went ahead and cast a Frenzied Regeneration as well, just to get my health back up, since it appears that the healer, I don't know what the healer was doing, but we came out of that alright. I popped a bunch of cooldowns to get there, but we did it. Alright, so we're going to grab this group here. We got a little Mastiff over here. And I believe this guy over here is not quite aggro to us. We'll do another Survival Instincts here, Frenzy Regeneration. We're going to cast an Iron Fur. Okay, so I've got Threat, so now I do kind of want to go into my rotation, make sure I'm keeping my Iron Fur up. We've got 3 stacks of Thrash on everyone, so I might start tab targeting through for some Moonfires. You know, keep my Iron Fur going. Thrash again, Mangle into Swipe, Maul since we're down to 1 target. Alright, and I'm pretty sure everybody's ready to go, so let's go ahead and Moonfire this guy. So we are going to start working on our Thrash stacks, get our Iron Fur going. 3 stacks of Thrash, probably time for another Moonfire. Mangle, we're building up rage. Let's go ahead and cast a Maul. Back into an Iron Fur here. Keep those 3 stacks of Thrash. Probably time for another Moonfire. Probably time for another Iron Fur. No big deal. fire. Let's get out of that. So that time I actually went from a Iron Fur straight into a Maul. Let's go ahead and do a Frenzied Regeneration. Just kind of help our healer out there at the end. And that's all there is to it. So as you can see with the Druid in particular, there's a lot of just repetitive over and over doing the same rotation. You probably only have to run a couple of dungeons to get really comfortable with this core rotation. And then after that, you can switch into a more advanced talent build. I'm not going to go in depth about that talent build here in this video. I will in a different video, but I did just want to pop it up on screen here. This is the talent build that I recommend once you're comfortable with the basic rotation. So if you're waiting around for my next video and you want to, progress to the next thing, change this up, take a look at things, and kind of figure out, what you'd like to do there. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed the guide. I hope this helps kickstart your journey as a Guardian Druid tank in the World of Warcraft. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Check out some of the other videos on my channel as well. I hope you're having fun in whatever it is that you're doing. And as always, I'll see you on the next video.